News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
PMQs today.
That's right. Yes, it is PMQs live in just a couple of minutes.
Are they going to ask Keir Starmer about the voice coach who, in my view, almost certainly was a breach of lockdown? What I think is more significant is, what was the point? Because if she did give him voice coaching, it didn't go very well, did it?
Oh, look, there's Bridget Phillips.
Because he has the worst voice.
She brings me out in hives.
He sounds like his vowels are strangled, and he speaks all nasal like that, doesn't he?
I'm not sure that's the point of that story for me.
However, yes, no, of course not. But the rules...
I'm very torn by that story, though, as you can imagine.
He pushed for even more onerous restrictions than the Tories had, and I didn't oppose, and I was opposed to the second lockdown, along with the first. So if he was breaking the rules it's outrageous.
I've never been as disappointed by the Labour Party as I was during the pandemic.
Don't forget, it was Christmas as well. Christmas Eve. Voice training on Christmas Eve.
That was when they had to be the opposition. That was when we needed a true opposition to step back and say, can we have a checks and balances? Can we have a risk-benefit analysis of this self-harm that we're committing on the country, which we're all paying for now, by the way?
Yeah.
And Keir Starmer didn't do that. But that's why I think this story, this is really... It's like it is the grist to my mill, like this, because this story shows that not only was he calling for more and more and more lockdowns when we needed him to do the opposite, he was also flouting the rules himself.
I know.
I can't. I want us to forget it all, but then that really hurts.
Yeah, and of course he's been asked about it once in public when he was at a briefing with the Secretary General of NATO, and he swept it away. Yeah. Apparently he was very cross, but I'd be astonished if it doesn't come up at Prime Minister's questions. I'm not so sure that Kemi Spadenok should ask about it, because I think she should ask about why they're giving away the Chego silence for £18 billion, which we own.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that she can go after, isn't there? As there is every single week at the moment, because so many things are going wrong. I don't know how she'll handle reform taking them over in the polls. She can't really say that either, can she?
Here we go. This is Prime Minister's questions now. We're handing over now to...
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Brilliant. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will be appalled by the death of a young boy in Sheffield on Monday. Our hearts go out to his family and his loved ones. Knife crime blights our communities, and we redouble every step to ensure that young people are kept safe. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, I met other European leaders in Brussels to discuss vitally important focus on security and defence in a volatile world. I'm determined to reduce barriers to trade, making it easier for businesses to do business, and ensuring a better relationship with our European partners delivers for the British people. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Neil Hutch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, suicide is the biggest killer of young people under 35. Andy Airy, Tim Owen and Mike Palmer are the 3 dads walking. They each tragically lost their precious daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, to suicide. And they have campaigned tirelessly for suicide prevention to be included in the school curriculum in an age-appropriate way. We met with the previous Prime Minister in Downing Street, and suicide prevention was added to the RSHE curriculum guidance for consultation last year. I know the Prime Minister has met the 3 dads and supports their campaign, but sadly progress has stalled. Please, would the Prime Minister meet with me and the 3 dads so that we can finally get this over the line and ultimately save young lives?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for steadfastly raising this really important issue, particularly during Children's Mental Health Week. I have met the three dads walking. They're inspirational, their courage is extraordinary, and as the father of young children, I don't know how they're able to campaign in the way that they do. I'm not sure I would be able to do so. So, of course, I can assure him that I will meet them again and push this agenda, really important agenda, forward.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 86% of trains at Kersley Station in my constituency were delayed or cancelled in the past 12 weeks, and this is widespread throughout the Bolton South and Walkden. My constituent Sophie, who commutes from Walkden to Manchester, recently told me almost every day at least one peak time train is cancelled, and when the train finally turns up, it's overcrowded. Recently, she was stranded for hours after constant cancellations because the train crew were unavailable. Can the Prime Minister ensure my constituents that this government is committed to building reliable railways after 14 years of Tory chaos?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight that the party opposite left our railways in a terrible state. 2 years of strikes costing our economy £850 million in lost revenue. You can't grow the economy if you can't run the railways. We will launch Great British Railways to focus relentlessly on passengers and to clamp down on delays and cancellation. And I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that Northern have announced the largest ever investment in its fleet to deliver 450 new trains, meaning more comfortable, reliable journeys for her constituents.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, our country loses. Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties. Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, we all lose. Sometimes they don't even bother. Why did the Energy Secretary withdraw government lawyers from defending the case against the eco-nutters who want to obstruct Rosebank's oil and gas fields?
Mr. Speaker, let me deal with the serious issue she raises in relation to the Chagos case. This is a military base that is vital to our national security and to national security. A number of years ago, the legal certainty of that base was thrown into doubt. And let me, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, and I'll pick my words carefully. Without legal certainty, the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should. That is bad for our national security, and it's a gift to our adversaries. Now, some within the party opposite know exactly what I'm talking about. That is why, Mr. Speaker, that is why the last government started negotiations about sovereignty and about securing the long-term use of the base. Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That's why the last government conducted 11 of the 13 rounds of those negotiations. And, Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That is why this government has completed that process, and we were right to do so. Mr. Speaker, I will set out the details when they're finalised, and it will, of course, be presented to Parliament. But if the Leader of the Opposition is properly briefed on the national security implications when she's asking these questions, which she's perfectly entitled to do, then she knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of national security and legal certainty. If, on the other hand, she's not properly briefed on the national security implications, she's not doing her job, she's not concerned about national security, and she's not fit to be Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, how can anyone believe that this man is defending UK interests when he bends the knee to anyone who asks him? His answer was so weak and so waffly, it is no wonder he needs a voice coach. But he didn't answer the question I asked him, why the Energy Secretary was not defending our country. The Energy and Environment Secretaries received nearly £400,000 worth of donations from Lisbeth Rousing. It's her money behind the court case that will stop an £8 billion investment, threaten thousands of jobs, and endanger energy security for all of us. Did the Energy Secretary refuse to defend UK interests because he's funded by billionaire eco-zealots?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll come to that very issue, but I noticed she didn't say she was briefed about the Chagos issue. This is important. Mr. Speaker, when she became leader of the opposition, I said to her that I would give her a briefing on any national security issue if she asked for it. That's very important to the way that we run our democracy. She has not asked for a briefing on the Chagos case. And that's because she's more interested in chasing reform than in national security. In relation to oil and gas, it'll be part of our energy supply for many years to come. We've been absolutely clear about that. But we are going through a transition. It's important because that transition to renewable energy will give us lower bills, energy security, take Putin's foot off our throat, and it's good for the national interest.
Mr. Speaker, this is a weak answer because he doesn't know what is going on. Last week, I asked about the employment bill. He didn't know what was going on. We asked about the education bill. He didn't know what was going on. Let me tell him what is going on. Maybe he can answer some questions. Shell has said a one-year delay to Rosebank will cost £350 million and the loss of 1,000 jobs. Equinor has said a two-year delay to Jackdaw will cost £800 million. The only benefit I can see is the £400,000 to Labour ministers. At a time of war in Europe, threatened energy security, increased competition from the US and elsewhere, we should be getting British oil and gas out of the ground. Does the Prime Minister have the guts to take on Labour donors and his Energy Secretary and approve the licence applications when they are resubmitted?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, she doesn't even want to know what's going on, otherwise she'd have asked for the relevant briefing. She knows the position on Rosebank. She knows the court case that has meant that the licence has got to be reviewed. There's a process that's got to be gone through in the proper way. She understands that, but yet again she's proving all she can do is student politics and playing party politics.
Mr. Speaker, I am speaking on behalf of the people of this country. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. He's talking about bringing growth and investment. Last week, he lost a £450 million investment from AstraZeneca that we negotiated, Mr. Speaker, and which would have delivered growth immediately. That same day, he also lost the £8 billion oil field investment that would have delivered next year. Business is abandoning the North Sea because of his decisions. What signal does he think he is sending to investors?
As she knows, AstraZeneca was a commercial decision. She must understand that. But, Mr. Speaker, all she does is come here every week, carping from the sidelines, talking our country down. We've got the highest investment for 19 years. PwC say the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF has upgraded growth. Wages are up. Inflation is down. There's more to do. Reforming planning and regulation, building new homes, supporting a runway, the third runway at Heathrow. What unites these? Championed by Labour, opposed by the Tories.
Mr. Speaker, it's so hard to believe anything he says. This is a man who needed emergency voice coaching on Christmas Eve. This government is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion. It is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion for GB Energy, a vanity project that is not great, not British, and does not produce any energy. Its own chairman, Mr. Speaker, admitted it will take 20 years to create just 1,000 jobs. Meanwhile, 200,000 jobs are at stake in our oil and gas sector right now. Does he think that 1,000 jobs in 20 years' time are worth more than the 200,000 jobs we have now?
Prime Minister.
Again, she clearly hasn't been briefed or doesn't want to be briefed. GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company that will drive the move to renewables. That is not about the number of jobs in HQ. It's about the thousands upon thousands of jobs that will generate to give us energy security, something we didn't have under the last government, take Putin's boot off our throat, something we didn't have under the last government. They lost control of the economy. We're getting it back.
He can waffle as long as he likes, Mr. Speaker. But we know that Labour promised to bring energy bills down by £300. Instead, bills are going up. He's freezing pensioners while shoveling money to Mauritius. The Prime Minister isn't just managing decline, Mr. Speaker. He is creating decline. He has the power to grant these licenses, open these oil and gas fields, save British jobs, and bring down bills. Why does he find it so hard to do the right thing?
She really needs to look into how these licenses are granted. I appreciate that their reset seems to be having no policies apart from cutting pensions and having no briefings on relevant issues. Let's just remind ourselves, they presided over the biggest drop in living standards on record. Mortgages went through the roof and they left a £22 billion black hole. And we learned last weekend, Mr. Speaker, that under the last government, £35 billion was lost on benefit fraud and error. Who was at the Treasury at the time, you might ask, Mr. Speaker? The Shadow Business Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition. They want to give lectures. No thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system. So can my right honourable friend confirm that under a Labour government, the NHS will be there for everyone when they need it, not having to worry about the bill?
Mr. Speaker, the NHS is the lifeblood of our country, and that's why we invested £25 billion at the budget, a record amount, in making it fit for the future through our plan for change. What a contrast with Reform, whose leader has said that those who can afford to pay should pay for our health care. Under Labour, the NHS will always be free at the point of use for anyone who needs it.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister about the terrible murder of the 15-year-old in Sheffield and say that we will support any effective action against knife crime that the government proposes? At his first Prime Minister's questions, I told the Prime Minister about my constituent Andrea. A full-time carer for her mother, Andrea is one of thousands of carers caught up in the carers allowance scandal, hounded by the DWP for repayments. The Prime Minister accepted there was a problem and set up an independent review, and we welcomed that. But 2 months after the announcement of the review, Andrea received a letter summoning her to a tribunal next week. Her mother's health has been deteriorating. She's had to go in a care home. This is the last thing Andrea needs. So will the Prime Minister step in and do the right thing and cancel Andrea's tribunal and all proceedings against carers like Andrea, at least until the review is concluded?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we set up the independent review, and I know he welcomes that and it was the right thing to do. I don't know the details of Andrea's case, but I will certainly, if he provides them to me, make sure that we have the details and look into what's happened in her particular case.
Sir Ed Davey.
I'm grateful for that reply. The Secretary of State for DWP wrote to me and wasn't interested in engaging, so I hope the Prime Minister will. Mr. Speaker, turning to foreign policy now, last night many of us were alarmed to hear President Trump speak about forcibly displacing 1.8 million people from Gaza. The Prime Minister has spoken to the President on several occasions now. Does he personally believe that Trump recognises the dangers of statements like this to the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and indeed to the security of both Palestinians and Israelis? I'm glad that the Foreign Secretary has confirmed that the government's position is still a two-state solution. I think that has support on all sides of the House. But will he reassure the House that this position and our concerns on these dangerous statements from the President will be communicated to the White House directly and firmly?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, you raised a very important issue. The most important issue on the ceasefire is obviously it's sustained. We see it through the phases, and that means that the remaining hostages come out and the aid that's desperately needed gets into Gaza at speed and at the volumes that are needed. I have, from the last few weeks, two images fixed in my mind. The first is the image of Emily Damari reunited with her mother, which I found extremely moving. The second was the image of thousands of Palestinians literally walking through the rubble to try to find their homes and their communities in Gaza. They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution.
Patricia Perks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The announcement of a third runway at Heathrow is obviously a massive boost to growth in the economy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is important that the economic boost is spread around the UK? And will he therefore agree to ask the relevant minister to meet with me and other Glasgow MPs and with the Chamber of Commerce to discuss the possibility of a new supply chain hub being created in the city where materials for Heathrow's expansion could be reassembled?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's right, the new runway at Heathrow can boost economic growth across the whole of the country. It would boost the economy by billions and create over 100,000 jobs across the UK, with 60% of the economic benefits outside London and the South East. It is, Mr. Speaker, good for Scottish passengers and Scottish businesses, particularly Scottish salmon, which is the #1 export passing through Heathrow, worth £970 million over the last 5 years. I'll obviously happily make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I can assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised. To ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is ensure it goes on forever. Quick question.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including...
Get on. No, you've got it. No, we're not both standing at the same. Look, I need a quick question, then I can get you the answer. Come on.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Folkestone and Hythe are expressing their frustration at the previous Tory government net migration figures, which quadrupled, increasing by nearly 1 million. But unbelievably, the Shadow Foreign Secretary has admitted that her party is proud of their open borders experiment on Britain. So will the Prime Minister explain what he is doing to bring these numbers back under control?
For raising this, because we know that the Leader of the Opposition personally lobbied to remove annual limits on student and work visas. The Shadow Foreign Secretary still thinks they got a great record on immigration, forgetting that they quadrupled immigration, reaching almost 1 million a year. Our borders bill will give stronger powers than ever to tackle people smugglers. We've already removed 16,000 people with no right to be here. The question for the opposition is, will they walk into the lobby with us next week to secure our borders?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After she was kidnapped and shot, Emily Damari was held in captivity by Hamas in UNRWA facilities, confirming many of our fears that UNRWA is riddled with Hamas sympathisers. So, the British people do not want our aid being stolen by Hamas. So will the Prime Minister agree with me that we should stop funding Hamas, follow the example of other nations and divert our aid to other, more trustworthy agencies?
Prime Minister.
On the question of Emily Damari, I've spoken with Mandy on many occasions, including when she didn't know whether her daughter was alive or not. And just listening to her was to really understand the torture that she went through. I spoke just the other day to Emily herself about the conditions in which she was held, and of course will continue to do so. But to be absolutely clear, and he knows this, we're not funding Hamas. Never will we condemn Hamas, and everybody in this House should condemn Hamas.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 54,000 women a year lose their jobs when they are pregnant or on maternity leave. 1 in 10 HR managers say they would be reluctant to hire a woman whom they thought was might start a family. Law has not solved this. Will the Prime Minister please meet with me, Dad Shift and Pregnant Then Screwed to discuss the ring-fence paid paternity leave that is needed to bring about change?
Prime Minister.
She raised a very important issue in relation to maternity pay and maternity leave. The Leader of the Opposition thinks that maternity pay is excessive, and that's the difference. We know that workers' rights are pro-growth, and I'm proud that our Employment Rights Bill will introduce parental leave from day one, which means 1.5 million more employees will be entitled to unpaid parental leave and 30,000 more fathers to paternity leave. I'm happy to ensure that she gets the meeting with the relevant minister.
Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that, like everyone in the House, the Prime Minister is an honourable member. On that basis, can you repeat his assurances that all rules were followed while the country was in Tier 4 lockdown in December 2020, not just by him, but as his team as well, but also his voice coach, Leona Mellinger?
Mr. Speaker, in December 2020, I was in my office working on the expected Brexit deal. With my team, we had to analyse the deal as it came in at speed, prepare and deliver a live statement at speed on one of the most important issues for our country in recent years. That's what I was doing. What were they doing? Suitcases of booze into Downing Street, partying and fighting, vomiting up the walls, leaving the cleaners to remove red wine stains. That's the difference. I was working, they were partying.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will support the Prime Minister's comments and send our thoughts to the family and all those who loved Harvey Wilgoose after his tragic and senseless death on Monday. I support the government's actions to tackle the sale of certain knives online. But before national media attention moves on from yet another tragic death of a young person, I know the Prime Minister will agree with me that in order to tackle the scale of the crisis engulfing too many of our communities, we need a whole system, cross-government approach to tackle the root causes of violence. Will he commit his government to tackling such a national strategy?
Prime Minister.
This incident was horrific and senseless, and I thank you for raising it. I think the thoughts of the whole House are with the victims' family, friends, and the school community and the wider community who've been impacted by this. We're all grateful to the first responders, the police officers and the medical staff who attended the scene. And it's right that South Yorkshire Police are given the time and space to carry out their investigation. We do need to do everything we can to bear down on knife crime. It is too easy to get knives online. It's too easy to carry knives without proper consequences. And that's why we've made it an absolute priority in government. And I hope it's a cross-party issue to absolutely bear down on knife crime.
James McCreary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister will share my deep concern that families in my constituency of Lewis, particularly those with disabled children, face agonising waits for essential adaptations to council housing. In my inbox, I have cases where delays have left people unable to use a bathroom or even access a kitchen to simply make a cup of tea. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how we can ensure councils have the funding they need urgently to build and retrofit homes to ensure that all children have the start in life they deserve?
Minister. Thank you for raising this really important issue for his constituents and actually so many constituents. I'm pleased to confirm that we've put down £69 billion for councils. That's a 6.8% cash terms increase, including up to £3.7 billion in vital additional funding for social care. We've doubled the funding for the Disabled Facilities Grant, an additional £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to make improvements that enable more independent lives, and will continue to do so working across the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 83 proud pottery workers woke up on Monday morning with no job following the collapse of the 200-year-old Royal Stafford pottery firm. It is a crisis in our ceramics industry. Escalating prices for energy and fake and foreign imports is causing a real problem. So could I ask the Prime Minister if he, through his offices, can arrange for the energy companies to meet with Ceramics UK and the GMB as the voice of the workforce so we can hammer out a new deal? And can he promote, through public procurement, buying British so that proud manufacturing jobs in Stoke will be protected?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this really important issue, and it is obviously a question of jobs, but it's also a question of identity and a sense of place. And of course, we'll work with the energy companies, and of course, we'll have the relevant meetings as he suggests.
Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Agnes lives in my Bicester and Woodstock constituency. In 2019, when she was 9, she was referred by her GP to Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, CAMS. Agnes has had to wait over 9 years for an assessment for the neurodiversity that has caused her crushing mental health problems. Last year, when Agnes's dad, Jim, sought to accelerate her appointment, he was told that CAMS could not see her or prioritise her appointment, and I quote, unless Agnes is actively trying to kill herself. Jim asked me to raise this case today because he wants to ensure that no other child goes through the same experience as his daughter. Will the Prime Minister meet with Agnes, Jim and me to hear their story?
Minister. Can I thank him for raising this issue in that way, and pass on to Agnes and Jim just how impactful what he has said is, and how important it is that he continues to raise this issue, because far too many children and young people are waiting far too long to receive the mental health support that they need, and we're determined to ensure more children and young people can access high quality mental health support in a timely manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Llandudno is a beautiful seaside town, a wonderful place to visit, but businesses are struggling with the rise in shoplifting. In many cases, thieves are stealing a full view of staff because they just don't fear the consequences. The recent funding boost for neighbourhood policing is very welcome, but could the Prime Minister please tell my constituents what more this government is doing to tackle retail crime and deter repeat offenders?
Prime Minister.
Well, for far too long, crimes like shoplifting have been written off as low level. That's wrong, it's devastating, and the party opposite left us with rising crime and effectively told the police to ignore shoplifting under £200 worth of goods. We've got rid of that shoplifters charter and working hard to make sure that we take a grip where they lost control.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, I wanted to raise an equally troubling case. My constituent retired from the police force to care for his wife, working a part-time job to help pay the bills. As his earnings were not consistent, there were times he was above the carer's allowance threshold, causing later payments to be withheld. He's now owed thousands of pounds, and recently he's been diagnosed with grade 4 glioblastoma, which has made the situation even more serious. Will the Prime Minister agree to look at this situation and ensure the Department for Work and Pensions supports rather than penalises carers?
Prime Minister.
And we've obviously set up the independent review into exactly what happened in these cases, which was the right thing to do. We will look at individual circumstances. So again, if she's willing to pass the details to me, we'll look at them.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Audit Scotland recently exposed the incredible funding crisis facing our councils in Scotland. £759 million of a funding gap. They also reported that the 12 councils that make up the Strathclyde Pension Fund are reducing their employer contributions from 19.3% to 6.5%. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that instead of taking money out of workers' pensions, that the Scottish Government appropriately fund our councils?
She's absolutely right to point out the failure of the government in Scotland. They don't want to talk about that failure. They've got the powers, they've got the resources, they just haven't got any excuses left.
Close question. Yep.
The honourable member asks about visiting Scotland. As he knows, my first visit as a Prime Minister, within days of becoming Prime Minister, was to Scotland, where I met the First Minister. I've also been for the meeting of the Council of Regions and Nations in October, Interpol General Assembly in November, the British Irish Council in Edinburgh in December, and look forward to going again very soon.
Dave Duggan.
Interesting, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister couldn't tell me when he was going to be coming to Scotland next. But does he agree with the withering assessment of the eminent politics professor Sir John Curtis, who says the current UK Prime Minister is the worst thing to happen to Anas Sarwar? And if he doesn't, and he should, does he think it's stripping Scottish pensioners of their winter fuel payment, or abandoning workers in Grangemouth, or attacking the national insurance payments of farmers? Does he believe that that is what's catastrophically torpedoed Labour in the polls in Scotland? So when he does get a date, he can even bring his Chancellor with him to back him up on the numbers, assuming she's still the Chancellor by then.
I remember when that rhetoric used to come from them sitting down here.
Order. Mr. Dugan, I want order. Mr. Dugan, I want no more. Prime Minister.
He has to shout, Mr. Speaker, because they're so far up there, so few of them, that they can't get heard without shouting.
My constituent Matthew and his mum Catherine, alongside Emma Murphy and Janet Williams, have campaigned for many years to get compensation for families affected by the epilepsy drug sodium valproate. 12 months on from the Patient Safety Commissioner's report on this matter, those harmed are still waiting for the recommendations to be implemented. So can I ask the Prime Minister how much longer individuals and families impacted by valproate will need to wait for the clarity they seek? And will the Prime Minister arrange for the Health Minister to meet with valproate campaigners to discuss this important matter?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a really important matter. I understand the Minister for Patient Safety did meet patient groups before Christmas to hear their stories and their accounts and experiences firsthand. And we will provide an update on the Patient Safety Commissioner's report at the earliest opportunity to the House.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We all know how the song goes. You got to know when to hold them, when to fold them, when to walk away and when to run. And we've done all of them in Northern Ireland because the system of government that we have is a gamble. Well, I'm not prepared to roll the dice on the people of Lagan Valley who have already been without government 40% of the time. Secretary of State for Northern Ireland says he wants to stop the cycles of collapse. So do I. But don't then turn around and tell us in Northern Ireland that we can't deliver public service transformation if no steps are taken to stop the collapse. The people of Northern Ireland who I represent, nationalist, unionist and unaligned like myself, are all out of aces. Our public services are on the floor. Will this government be the one to step up to the plate, reform the institutions, end the veto and stop rolling the dice on the people of Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since 1998, the Good Friday Agreement has delivered a far more peaceful society in Northern Ireland, and that is really important. Restoration of the power sharing was a significant milestone and allows the institutions to make progress on the most important issues to the people of Northern Ireland, and will continue to work with all parties to that end.
Jill Furness.
Speaker, I was delighted to recently visit Chaucer School, a great school in my constituency with fantastic young people and innovative and motivated teaching staff. But 14 years of Tory government did not do enough for more than 300,000 children across the country attending schools that are stuck and kept receiving poor Ofsted judgments. Will the Prime Minister set out how this government will tackle inequality and tear down barriers to opportunity through our plan for change?
Mr. Speaker, the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill will ensure that all schools can innovate, new teachers are qualified, and every child receives a consistent core education to set them up for success in life.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Mr. Speaker, 5 months ago, the Care Quality Commission reported that 2/3 of maternity units in England were unsafe. And years of unsafe staffing levels have resulted in the NHS paying an astonishing £1.15 billion a year in compensation due to avoidable injuries caused during childbirth and sometimes deaths. The previous Conservative government have allowed maternity services to deteriorate to the point where many consider it to be a public health crisis. Will the Prime Minister commit to improving maternity care and women's health services as a top priority so our maternity unit in Winchester and those around the rest of the country are the safest places in the world for women to give birth?
I thank you for raising this important issue. Women and babies deserve the highest standards of care through pregnancy, birth and the months that follow. We're committed to recruiting thousands of new midwives for the NHS whilst providing support to trusts failing on maternity care. Mr. Speaker, we're working with the NHS as it delivers a 3-year maternity plan which is making good progress in improving services, including for his constituents.
Final question, Michael Wheeler.
Mr. Speaker, last week I had the opportunity to visit 2 of the local job centres that serve my constituency of Worsley and Eccles. The dedication of the staff I met to helping our local community, supporting people into work and adapting to the area's needs was inspiring. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must listen to their frontline experiences as we look to remove the barriers to work that keep people locked out of jobs, and will he visit these teams with me to see the work they do?
I thank you for his question. Our Get Britain Working White Paper sets out the biggest reforms to employment support in a generation, backed by £240 million of investment. And through our plan for change, we'll boost living standards, more secure, rewarding jobs to make work pay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
No. Well, there was the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, asking questions for 40 minutes. It seems that Prime Minister's questions is growing in length by the week. We're joined now in the studio by the Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, and the Conservative MP, Esther McVeigh. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for sending in all your brilliant questions. Remember, that's the point of this programme. It's about your questions to our brilliant all-women panel today. And I am going to start with you, Labour's Siobhan McDonough. It's a question from Peter. It was referenced in Prime Minister's question time from the backbenchers, but also referenced by Kemi Badenoch, even though she didn't put a direct question about this. Can a voice coach really be classed as a key worker? I'm going to jump in and say no.
Well, this is about the voice coach going to the meeting at Labour Party headquarters on Christmas Eve during lockdown.
Indeed.
One thing I am absolutely confident about. Keir Starmer is a lawyer to his fingertips. He will have studied the rules, he knew what the rules were, and he certainly wasn't breaking them.
And well, I would just say this will play into the narrative of two-tier Keir and hypocrisy. So people couldn't see the family members, whether it's at a funeral, but he has designated somebody, a key worker, to have voice coaching. I think this, we don't know where it's going to go, but I think this will get worse and worse as a story for him. I really do.
But you don't have permission, Estimate Bay, as a Conservative, to talk about rule breaking during lockdown.
That's do, because I didn't do anything.
But your government...
And this is where people will say, well, hang on a sec. When Boris had a piece of cake or whatever and it was Partygate, and the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer going on and on and on about it, but he did the beer and curry night with Angela Rayner. He's now had a voice coach going in. I actually think this could rumble on, actually. I was surprised there wasn't more of it made at PMQs.
Siobhan McDonagh, is there not a problem here for Keir Starmer? Because the only fixed penalty notice that Boris Johnson got was for that meeting, well, that cake in the cabinet room on the 19th of June 2020. Rishi Sunak was there too. A number of civil servants were there. There was some really quite unappetising looking orange juice on the table. We've seen the pictures. It didn't look like a big party. And that is the fixed penalty notice Boris Johnson got. If that's the bar, could it not be the case that inviting a voice coach to travel 60 miles during the highest tier of lockdown that London ever faced, could that not be seen on the same level?
I'm absolutely convinced that Keir Starmer will have made an assessment of that. He is a man who follows the rules, perhaps a little more than many of us would in all sorts of respects, but that is who he is. And taking up Esther's point, I don't think it's he who decides that a voice coach is a key worker. I think they look at the actual legal definition that was in the guidance, such as it was at the time. And I don't think people pick over the complete details that you understand, Tom. There was a feeling at the Downing Street, there was parties, there were people behaving badly, and that feeling of chaos that surrounded Boris at most of the time.
I think the question was, should he have been designated a key worker? And that's where they say, yes, you're right, he is a lawyer, and he's bended those rules, if this comes out of it, that he designated a key worker. And they're saying, because it's not. She shouldn't have been, and I think that's where it will get that two-tier Keir. There he was going on about
just jump back into the House of Commons, where there's an urgent question on the Chagos Islands.
From Nigel Farage. There he is.
It seems perhaps you were rather more reluctant to be here today. Jonathan Powell, our National Security Advisor, has been doing the rounds in Washington, and he's been telling everybody, including the new cabinet members, that this is necessary, that we have to give away the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, and that in those circumstances, a negotiated 99-year lease is the best option. But of course, that's just not true, is it? It just isn't true at all. It doesn't stand. There is no legal basis on which we have to give away the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. Yeah. An advisory judgment from the ICC has no force of legal power whatsoever. Indeed, America disregard it so much, they're not even members of it. And I am pretty convinced, and by the way, they've been fairly busy with foreign policy, the Americans, just lately, so perhaps no wonder that Diego Garcia has not been high on their agenda. But when the Americans wake up to the fact that this has been done wholly unnecessarily, I wouldn't be surprised if we find ourselves, together with the European Union, in their tariff regime. Can the Minister confirm there is no binding legal basis for this transfer of sovereignty whatsoever?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the honourable gentleman goes over ground that he has gone over before, and which I've answered in this House and indeed discussed in the debate yesterday. We've been very clear, as indeed the previous government was, that this base was not on a secure footing. This has been done in full agreement with the US national security apparatus across the place. And he referred to the ICC. Of course, it was the ICJ which made that judgment. And we are very, very clear that that joint UK UK US base on Diego Garcia plays a critical role in countering an array of threats to regional international security, and we will not scrimp on security. We will not scrimp on the security of that base, the solidity of the agreements around it, and ensuring that it is in operation well into the next century, and that we're able to operate unimpeded as we do today. And that is exactly why the previous government recognised there was a problem and engaged in this process, and it's why we have brought that problem to a conclusion with a deal that protects our interests, protects the interests of the United States, and ensures...
We've been listening to an urgent question in the House of Commons on the Chagos Islands. Foreign Office Minister Stephen Doughty answering that question posed by Nigel Farage. Still with us in the studio, the Labour MP Siobhan McDonough and Esther McVey, the Conservative MP. Siobhan, this is a thorny issue for the government because it's a hefty price tag to give away territory.
Well, we need to know what the details are, don't we, of any negotiation. It's not this government that have been solely negotiating. The previous government were negotiating. There's clearly that something needs to be done about the islands and about maintaining our base in Diego Garcia. All the statements made recently have been about ensuring that both the UK and America are on the same page. But we've had a complete merry-go-round, haven't we? We've got a new government here, we've got a new Prime Minister in Mauritius, and we've got a new President in America. So clearly it's up there and everybody's juggling.
But isn't the politics of this... Because you gave a very detailed answer there, but to me, to anyone sitting at home, to anybody listening or watching, I think June sums it up best. If you have a black hole, you have been talking about the black hole that the Conservatives left you with. If you have a black hole, how come Starmer can give billions to the Mauritian government? Isn't it just that simple? It doesn't sit right with people. It doesn't feel right. That, in fact, was it Nigel Farage who said the winter fuel payment goes, but you can find money for these things?
Well, what you're doing is you're setting up two different things to get the wrong answer, or you're adding 2 and 2 to get 6, aren't you? Because what are the parameters of the negotiation? What are we expecting the Mauritians to do? How much do we want to hang on to that base, that defence base? And it seems to me that strategically it's very important, particularly given the Mauritians' relationship with Chinese, which I know is motivating a lot of it.
Isn't the issue here that some people take this judgment from the ICJ as being absolute, resolute, we must follow it, and other people say it's advisory? And Esther McVey, I put it to you that we've entered a different world now when it comes to international law and international relations. Clearly, Donald Trump is not someone who respects rulings from the ICJ or indeed non-curate votes in the United Nations. Do we really need to give away these islands, given the new world that we face, where perhaps people like Donald Trump appreciate the ICJ less than people like Keir Starmer?
Really, it was a non-binding advisory opinion. That's what it was. And so you're quite right. You should be negotiating and arguing that it was non-binding.
Why don't Liz Truss start those negotiations?
You're right. It had already started. But that's when David Cameron intervened and said, we need to stop this here. And we need to look at this as the world has changed, as we look at the security across the globe. And if you think what the Labour governments have just done now, and therefore I think Kemi's words will take traction, every time Labour negotiate, our country is worse off. So they've negotiated for a more expensive deal, which is less, which will go, whereas before you could have actually extended it, now you can't. I would say I stop it. To me, it's non-binding. I would not be handing away this territory and paying for it. It's a disgrace of a deal.
Hey, all of us, as I understand it, have not negotiated any international treaties or brought the end to the violence in Northern Ireland. Jonathan Powell, our negotiator, has, and he is a man of great expertise and great ability.
I want to come on to one more. I want to come on to one more subject.
Esther, just do a quick comeback there. Okay. What was your point?
Well, you looked at the money, and now they have made a worse deal because it's going to be front-loaded. It's going to be significantly more. It's going to be lined with inflation. They can't get extended reach after 40 years. But what I'm saying, I wouldn't be doing it. It was non-binding. Keir Starmer goes on how great he is as a lawyer. Well, get your head around this one and let's not give those
We've got time for one more question, one more subject, and I think it's an important one. The NHS, much closer to home. I want to put to you, and I'm going to start this with you, Esther McVeigh. Stuart says 3 weeks to get a GP appointment, 3 weeks to get x-rays, 12 to 18 months to see a consultant for assessment. With private health, 2 days to see a consultant. About time everybody realised the NHS is a money pit. I tried using the NHS. The pain is unbearable. That's the Conservative legacy, Esther McVeigh.
Well, I think, look, did things go worse after lockdown? Absolutely they did. Have people put more and more money into the NHS? Yes, they have, billions more. We're heading up to 200 billion. So the point that is made there, do we now have to look at things in a different way? So we keep the free at the point of delivery, but are we going to have to look at delivering it in a different way? So the demand is greater, the number of people in the country are greater, people are living longer, that demand is going up and up and up. But I think we've got to say, how are we going to deliver it? If the private sector can deliver it better and faster, but for the same amount of money, and still you get it at the free at the point of need, we have to look down that route.
Siobhan, why have there been reviews and consultations launched by the Health Secretary? It doesn't seem that much legislation is actually happening. Parliament's been breaking up at about 4 p.m. each day, when we all know it could run much later into the evening doing more work. It seems
if
like the government's
legislation
stalled.
could sort out the queues in A&E, we could stay there all night. I'm sure Esther and I would agree to. But the NHS needs two things. It needs money and it needs reform. And one of the things that we haven't been frightened of doing is using the private sector in order to get those waiting lists down. And we are see them coming down, but we have a real issue with how the NHS is structured. I certainly know in my area, all the walk-in centres that you used to have open 12 hours a day or longer, they all closed when the money dried up, and we relied more and more on GPs, so there weren't different options. So people are actually making the most rational decision to turn up to A&E because that is where they can assure being seen. But we need to provide more services that are better for people closer to where they live, and that is going to take a lot longer than the 6 months we've had to date.
It's going to be a big and thorny issue that rolls on and on, but we have run to the end of the programme. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Lovely to see both women on the panel today. Lovely to see Tom in a minority of one. He's used to it.
Oh, no, very, very good. Absolutely fantastic panel. And also thank you to you at home for sending in all of your questions. We'll, of course, be back not next week.
Yes, we will.
Yes, next week, not the week after. Learning our parliamentary recess schedule.
You have been watching and listening to PMQs Live with Gloria DiPiero and Tom Howard. He is not going anywhere, so stay here because it's Tom and Emily with Good Afternoon Britain.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Dry for the vast majority today. Quite a bit of hazy winter sunshine on offer as well. It's a little colder than yesterday, and certainly tonight there's going to be a frost forming, all thanks to this high pressure that's building in. The weather fronts that brought the rain yesterday, well, that's clearing away. It's a cold front, so it has introduced cooler air. It's not completely dry. There are a few showers drifting in on the breeze into western parts of Scotland, but most places will stay dry. Quite a lot of high cloud moving into England and Wales, so the sunshine will turn hazy.